Do you feel your childhood was full of problems that were way beyond those innocent years? As a kid, you had to face things that none of your age fellows could understand. Time has passed now, and your body has grown, but these odd struggles are still there. Well, nothing happened to you without a plan, a special God's plan. In this video, we'll reveal 10 powerful signs from your childhood that prove God's hand has been on your life all along. If these resonate with you, it's not by chance, it's a divine calling. Watch closely because your purpose is greater than you ever imagined, and you cannot ignore it. God doesn't wait until we're grown to begin His work in us. He doesn't just call people. He prepares them early, and often in ways we don't recognize. The first indication that you were marked for something greater is the sign most people overlook, yet it shapes everything that follows. Sign 1. You faced battles no one could have imagined. Some kids grow up carefree, protected, nurtured, and surrounded by love. However, for some of us, childhood felt more like a battlefield. While other kids were playing, we were learning how to survive. While they were being taught that the world was safe, we were already seeing how cruel it could be. Maybe home wasn't a place of peace for you. Maybe love wasn't something you could count on. Maybe you faced rejection, loneliness, or even loss when you were far too young to understand it. The hardest part was that you never got an answer, no explanation, just this lingering question. Why did my life feel so much harder than everyone else's? Most people assume life is just random, that some people get lucky while others suffer. But what if the battles you faced as a child weren't random at all? What if they were signs? A sign that you were being prepared, a sign that you were different, a sign that God's hand was on your life long before you ever knew it. Because here's something few people realize: the enemy doesn't fight what isn't a threat. If your childhood was filled with battles, it wasn't because you were forgotten. It was because you were feared. There was something inside of you, something powerful, something God-ordained, that the enemy saw before you did, and if he couldn't stop you from being chosen, he wanted to break you before you could step into that calling. If you think this only happens to you, you are wrong. This has always been the pattern of the universe. Do you remember the story of Joseph? Joseph was just a boy when he started having dreams, visions of the future, and glimpses of his destiny. However, his whole life fell apart when he started having those dreams. But the moment those dreams came, his whole life fell apart. His own brothers, the people who should have loved him the most, betrayed him. They threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and let him believe he had been abandoned. Now pause for a second and think about that. Not strangers, not enemies, his own family. Can you relate? Have you ever been hurt by the very people who were supposed to protect you? Have you ever felt like your own home wasn't safe? If you have, let me tell you this. It wasn't because you were unloved. It was because you were called. Joseph's story didn't end in betrayal. It didn't end in suffering, because what his brothers meant for evil, God used for good. The pain that should have destroyed him positioned him. Years later, he rose to power, not just surviving the pit and slavery, but thriving with the help of God and his ingenuity. He became the savior of the very family that abandoned him. That is how God works. He takes the things meant to break you and uses them to build you. So ask yourself, could it be that your struggles were not meant to end you, but to prepare you? Could it be that every battle you fought has been shaping you into the person you need to be? There is a pattern in the plans of God. He does not call the untested. He does not put unprepared people in positions of power. He shapes his chosen ones through fire. And when does that shaping start? Early. Look at yourself now. After everything you've been through, you're still here, stronger, wiser, and more aware. You see through things that others do not. You carry a depth, a resilience, a fire inside you that wasn't given to you by an easy life. It was forged in the very battles that tried to take you out. Would you have that strength if everything had been easy? Would you have that wisdom if you never had to fight? The very thing you thought was breaking you was actually building you. However, here you can ask a question: why did it have to hurt so much? The answer is that when God is preparing someone for a great destiny, He doesn't train them in comfort. He doesn't make the path easy, He makes the person strong. Do you want to know some examples? Look at David, anointed as king as a boy but forced to fight battles long before he ever wore a crown. Think about Moses, who had to be saved from death as a baby and then led through a wilderness before leading a nation. We already have mentioned Joseph, who was given dreams as a child but was thrown into a pit before he ever saw a throne. Maybe no one ever told you this before. Maybe you've spent years wondering if you were just unlucky or cursed. Suppose you were just one of those people whose life seemed to hit harder. But now you see the truth. You weren't being punished. You were being positioned. You weren't abandoned. You were being prepared. Despite everything you have faced, you're still standing. Do you know what that means? That means your story isn't over yet. However, here's where it gets even more interesting. Those who are chosen by God don't just experience hardship. Many of them also experience something else, something that sets them apart in a way that they don't even fully understand. While we are getting shaped by struggles and hardships, at the same time, we are given gifts that were very hard to comprehend at such a young age. Before we get into that, if this message is speaking to you, take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find this message, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started. The next sign is something that many people cannot understand, but it's one of the clearest ways God marks those He has chosen. Sign 2. Animals and children with problems were attracted to you. There's something about you that certain people, and even animals, seem to recognize. They don't always know why, but they feel it. Maybe you've noticed it too. The way a lost dog followed you home, sitting by your feet like it had known you forever. The way a baby, restless in someone else's arms, immediately settled when they were handed to you. Maybe it wasn't just animals or children, maybe strangers, people you barely knew, felt comfortable spilling their pain to you, trusting you with their deepest wounds without hesitation. At the time, you might not have thought much of it. Maybe you chalked it up to having a calm energy, or just being good with kids, or an animal person. But looking back, doesn't it seem strange? Why were they always the ones who were hurting? Why was it the lost, the scared, the broken who were drawn to you? What if I told you? This wasn't random. There was something different about you, even as a child. You might not have realized it, but your presence had a way of making others feel safe. Not just physically, but spiritually. People in pain and animals in distress recognize peace when they find it. They can sense a heart that carries light, a soul that brings comfort. And even before you knew who you were, before you understood anything about your calling, they felt it in you. This wasn't something you were taught. It wasn't a skill you developed. It was something that was placed inside of you from the very beginning. When God marks someone, that mark doesn't stay hidden. It radiates, it touches others, often before the person carrying it even realizes it's there. That's why certain people sort you out in their hardest moments. That's why children who don't fake emotions or filter their reactions feel drawn to you. That's why animals who respond purely to energy find safety in your presence. It was never about you being nice or kind-hearted. It was about the spiritual atmosphere that followed you wherever you went, even if you weren't aware of it, even if you doubted yourself. The ones who needed it the most recognized it in you. But let's be honest, this kind of presence, this kind of calling isn't always easy. From a young age, you might have noticed that people leaned on you. They came to you, expected things from you, sought you out when they were in distress, but didn't always offer the same back. Sometimes that was exhausting. You might have felt like you were carrying emotions that weren't yours, feeling other people's pain in a way that left you drained. It's one thing to be kind. It's another to absorb the burdens of others without knowing how to release them. This is what happens when someone has a spirit meant to heal. Even before they understand their purpose, they feel deeply, they take on the pain of others, and sometimes they don't know how to set it down. But here's something important. God never gives a calling without giving the strength to carry it. If you've always been the one people run to, it's because He designed you that way. And if He designed you that way, He will also teach you how to carry this gift without it breaking you. This reminds me of a well-known spiritual figure, St. Francis of Assisi. He had an extraordinary connection to both animals and people. It was said that even wild creatures trusted him, that birds would gather around him, and that he once calmed a dangerous wolf simply by speaking to it with love. But it wasn't just animals. The poor, the sick, the outcasts, they all came to him. Not because of his wealth, not because of his power, but because he carried something that gave people peace. Does that sound familiar? If you've ever had an animal, a child, or even a stranger cling to you in their most vulnerable moments, it could be a sign that God has been using you in ways you didn't even realize. Maybe, for most of your life, you thought this was just your personality, that you were simply a good listener, someone who loves animals, or just happens to be the person people talk to. But what if this wasn't just about personality? Not everyone carries this presence. Not everyone has this unspoken connection with the broken. Not everyone walks through the world with a spirit that draws in those who need healing. There's a difference between being a kind person and having a spiritual calling that others can feel, even if they don't have the words for it. If this has been happening in your life for as long as you can remember, then it's not just who you are, it's what you were created for. Think about your own experiences. Have you noticed that children always seem to run to you even when they're scared or upset? Have you found that animals, especially those that are lost or injured, seem to trust you without hesitation? Have you been in situations where strangers, people you barely knew, started opening up to you as if they had known you forever? If so, this isn't random. It's spiritual. You've been carrying something powerful since childhood, and the ones who needed it the most, they recognized it even before you did. However, there's something even more mysterious about those who are chosen by God. While some people are called to comfort others, others are given something even more unusual, something that reveals the truth before it even happens. If you've ever had dreams that felt more real than reality, dreams that showed you things before they came to pass, then you might have experienced one of the most powerful signs of all. Sign 3. You had prophetic dreams. Some memories from childhood blur over time, but others stay with you forever. And then there are the dreams, the ones that never fade. Maybe you had them too, dreams so vivid, so lifelike, that they felt more like experiences than imagination. Some of them left you feeling peaceful, others left you with an unshakable sense of urgency. Maybe, just once or twice, you saw something in a dream that later came true. During those moments, a quiet thought must have crossed your mind. Was that just a coincidence? Or was it something more? At the time, you probably didn't have an answer, but deep down, something in you knew. Those dreams weren't like the others, and they were not random at all. Most people forget their dreams the moment they wake up. They brush them off, assuming they were just scattered thoughts from the day before. But for some people, especially those who are chosen, dreams carry something different. They carry meaning. They carry messages. Throughout history, God has used dreams as a way to speak to His people. It's one of the few times when the mind is quiet enough to listen, when distractions fade and truth can be revealed. Dreams don't just pass through the subconscious, they leave imprints on the soul. Looking back, were there moments when you woke up feeling like a dream had something to tell you? Maybe you couldn't explain it, but you felt it. An unshakable sense that what you had just seen meant something. Maybe not for that moment, maybe not even for that year, but something in you knew it wasn't just imagination. If you've had dreams like this, you weren't just dreaming. You were being spoken to. You may not have known it at the time, but the way you experienced dreams as a child was already setting you apart. Some dreams felt more like messages than random stories. Some left behind emotions that lingered for days. And then there were the dreams that came true, the ones that startled you, the ones that made you stop and wonder, how did I know? This wasn't something everyone experienced. Some people go through their entire lives without ever having a dream that means something, but not you. Your dreams carried weight, and even before you understood why, they were shaping you into someone different. This experience isn't unique to one faith or tradition. Across different spiritual paths, there are stories of chosen ones who were given insight through dreams before they ever stepped into their purpose. Siddhartha Gautama, who later became the Buddha. Before he left his royal life behind, before he began his search for truth, he had powerful dreams, visions that unsettled him, glimpses of suffering that he had never witnessed in his protected world. Those dreams weren't ordinary. They were pulling him towards something deeper, something he couldn't ignore. What's more interesting is that he didn't fully understand them at first. He had to step into his journey before their meaning became clear. That's exactly how it works for those who are chosen. Dreams don't come with explanations. They come as whispers, as glimpses, as signs that only make sense when the time is right. You might be wondering why these dreams started so early. Why, as a child, were you shown things you didn't fully understand? The answer is simple. God doesn't wait until you're older to begin speaking to you. He starts early, planting seeds of awareness before the world can strip them away. Dreams are one of the first ways he reaches out, showing glimpses of things that won't make sense right away, but will become clear when you need them most. That's why some of your childhood dreams still linger in your mind today, not because they were just interesting, but because they were meant to stay with you. They were meant to be carried, waiting for the right moment to reveal their full meaning. However, let's be honest, this gift isn't always easy. Having vivid or prophetic dreams can be overwhelming, especially when they feel like puzzles you can't solve. Some dreams bring peace, but others bring warnings. Some feel symbolic, while others feel shockingly real. And when a dream actually comes true, it can be unsettling. Maybe you've had a moment where something played out exactly as you had seen it in a dream, and you felt that eerie sense of recognition. Maybe you tried to tell someone, only to have them dismiss it. Over time, you might have even learned to keep these things to yourself, thinking, maybe it's just me. But it's not just you. The truth is, most people aren't wired to receive messages this way, and that's why they don't always understand. But you were created differently. What felt like a strange, isolated experience was actually one of the first signs that you were meant to see things others couldn't. If you've had dreams that felt significant, if they've stayed with you for years, if you've seen things before they happened, then this isn't just a phase or a personality trait. It's a gift. Not everyone has it. Not everyone is given glimpses of truth before it unfolds. But you were. That means something. Having prophetic dreams is one thing, but what truly sets apart those who are chosen isn't just what they see, it's what they stand for. Because those who carry truth in their dreams often carry it in their hearts as well. And for them, truth isn't just important, it's something they would defend, no matter the cost. Sign 4. You could die for truth and authenticity. Truth has always been more than just an idea to you. It's something you feel, something you can't ignore. From a young age, deception never sat right with you. Even when people spoke with confidence, if something felt off, you knew. Their words might have sounded perfect, but deep down, you could sense when the energy didn't match. Some called you too sensitive, others said you were overthinking, but no matter how much you tried to silence that feeling, it never went away. You couldn't just accept what wasn't real, because for you, truth has never been optional. Some people go through life accepting what they're told, never questioning, never noticing the gaps between what's said and what's actually true. That was never you. You had a way of sensing things, tension in a room, dishonesty in someone's voice, the shift in a person's energy before anything even happened. You picked up on it all. While others took things at face value, you could see past the surface. This wasn't just intuition, it was discernment, one of the clearest signs that you were chosen for something greater. Having this kind of awareness wasn't always easy. It made relationships complicated. People didn't always appreciate your ability to read between the lines. Sometimes they deny what you saw. Other times they resented you for noticing. When you pointed things out, they dismissed it. They told you to stop overanalyzing, to stop asking so many questions. Over time, you may have learned to keep quiet and stop voicing what you felt. But the knowing never left. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Samuel's story mirrors this experience in a profound way. As a child, he heard a voice calling his name in the middle of the night. Thinking it was Eli, the priest he served under, he ran to him. But Eli hadn't called him. After this happened multiple times, Eli realized what was happening. God was speaking to Samuel. Samuel had ears to hear what others couldn't. When the time came, he didn't just recognize the truth, he carried it, delivering messages that no one else wanted to hear. Like Samuel, you've had this ability since childhood. Where others ignored the signs, you noticed them. Where others followed the crowd, you questioned everything. Not because you wanted to cause trouble, but because you couldn't accept what wasn't real. Not everyone is ready for the truth. Some would rather believe the comfortable lie than face the hard reality. That's why, from a young age, people may have tried to convince you that you were wrong. They weren't trying to protect you, they were trying to protect themselves. When someone walks in truth, those who live in deception feel exposed. Instead of facing that discomfort, they try to silence the one who brings it. They tell them they're imagining things. They call them difficult. But the truth remains. You weren't given this gift to be quiet. You weren't meant to shrink yourself for the sake of making others comfortable. There were moments when standing for truth cost you something. Friendships, opportunities, peace. Not because you were wrong, but because you refused to play along with what wasn't real. Losing people isn't easy. It's tempting to wonder if things would have been different if you had just ignored your instincts. But ask yourself this: if you had to pretend to be blind just to keep them in your life, was that connection ever real to begin with? Not everyone is ready for the truth, but the ones who are, they need people like you. Being able to see the truth is only the first step. The real calling comes when you feel the urge to do something about it. Maybe you were the one who stepped in when there was conflict, the friend people ran to when they needed clarity, the person who, even as a child, found themselves acting as the fixer when no one else knew what to do. This isn't a coincidence. Those who carry truth in their spirit are often called to bring order where there is chaos. This leads us to the next sign. Those who are chosen don't just see what's wrong, they take action. They're the ones who step in, who bring solutions, who refuse to stand by when something needs to be fixed. Carrying truth isn't just about knowing what's real, it's about making things right. Sign 5. You have always been a problem solver. There were moments in your life when everything should have fallen apart. Times when you had no clear way forward, no resources, no help, yet somehow you made it through. Maybe you didn't know how the path wasn't clear, but something always opened up at just the right time. It wasn't that life was easy. In fact, it felt like you had to work harder than most. But no matter how impossible things seemed, you kept pushing, and things always found a way to work out in your favor. Some people might call that luck, but deep down, you know it was never just luck. Think about all the times when life stacked the odds against you. Maybe you didn't have the right connections, yet an opportunity appeared when you needed it most. Maybe you were put in a situation where you should have failed, yet somehow you thrived. There might have been moments when people underestimated you, dismissed you, or even tried to block your path, yet you still came out ahead. Looking back, You can't always explain how things worked out, but they did. That's because you weren't moving alone. There was a force guiding you, clearing a path where there wasn't one, ensuring that no obstacle could hold you back for long. Of course, you worked for it. You fought, you endured, and you didn't give up when things got hard. But plenty of people work hard and still don't make it. What made your story different? There was something at play beyond just effort. Some call it divine favor, some call it protection. Whatever name you give it, one thing is clear: you weren't left to fight your battles alone. That's why, time and time again, breakthroughs happened right when they needed to. That's why, when one door closed, another opened in a way you never expected. This wasn't a coincidence. It was alignment. If you look at history, many spiritual leaders had to walk this path, overcoming impossible obstacles with the help of divine guidance. Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism. From an early age, he saw the world differently. He questioned the injustices around him, refusing to blindly follow the rigid societal norms of his time. This made life difficult. He faced resistance from those who didn't understand his vision. Despite the challenges, he never stopped speaking the truth. When people tried to silence him, his voice only grew louder. When he was thrown into difficult situations, miraculous interventions took place. At one point, he mysteriously disappeared into a river for 3 days, and when he returned, he spoke of a divine revelation that changed the course of his life forever. At every step, doors opened for him that should have remained closed. The struggles he endured only strengthened his calling. Instead of breaking him, his challenges positioned him for something greater. Looking at your own life, can you see moments like that? Have there been times when everything was against you, yet somehow you still succeeded? It's easy to feel frustrated when obstacles keep appearing in your life. Maybe you've even asked, why does everything have to be so hard? Why do I have to fight for things that come so easily to others? But what if your challenges weren't meant to block you? What if they were meant to prepare you? If everything had been easy, you wouldn't have developed resilience. If doors had always been wide open, you wouldn't have learned how to create new ones. If nothing had ever stood in your way, you wouldn't have discovered the strength that's been inside you all along. Your struggles weren't punishments, they were training. Every time you faced a setback, you weren't just surviving it, you were growing through it. The times when you had to figure things out alone, they taught you problem-solving skills that no classroom ever could. The moments when you felt like quitting but didn't, they gave you the endurance that most people don't have. It might not have felt like it at the moment, but all along, life was shaping you into someone capable of carrying a great purpose, because those who are called aren't trained in comfort. They are forged in fire. Look back on your journey. How many times did you think something was the end, only for it to become a new beginning? How often did things seem impossible, yet somehow a way was made? At this point, you probably don't even question it anymore. You just know things will work out because they always have. Even when you don't see a way forward, you keep going because deep inside, you've learned that breakthroughs always come, often when you least expect them. That's not luck. That's not just persistence. That's purpose unfolding. While this ability has served you well, it hasn't always been easy. There were times when you wished someone else would step in to help, yet you found yourself being the one figuring things out alone. People may have relied on you, expecting you to fix things, assuming you'd just handle it. But who was there for you? Being strong is a gift, but it can also make you feel lonely. When people see you overcoming obstacles time and time again, they assume you don't need help. They forget that even the strongest ones sometimes need support too. That quiet loneliness is something you've carried for years, isn't it? People like you, those who have had to overcome challenges on their own, often carry something else as well. When someone learns to fight battles without help, they also learn something others don't, what it feels like to be alone, even when surrounded by people. It's a quiet kind of loneliness, the feeling of standing in a room full of people and still sensing that you're different. If you've ever felt that no one fully understood you, like you were somehow set apart, then the next sign is going to explain why. Sign 6. You felt alone, even in crowds. Have you ever been in a room full of people laughing and talking, surrounded by voices, yet still felt completely alone? It's not the kind of loneliness that comes from a lack of people. You might have had friends, family, or even a social life, but deep inside, something felt disconnected, like you were standing on the outside, looking in. You could be in a conversation, nodding along, smiling at the right moments, but part of you wasn't really there. It was as if you were different in a way that no one else could see. Maybe you didn't have the words for it back then, but you felt it. You always did. And if that feeling never quite left you, it might be because you were set apart for something greater. This wasn't just about being shy or introverted. You could be social, you could enjoy people's company, but something inside you was always observing, always processing at a level others did not seem to reach. Maybe your friends were happy just going along with things, never questioning, never looking deeper. But you couldn't just accept things the way they were. You asked questions, you searched for meaning, and you felt things more intensely than most. Conversations that felt satisfying to others might have felt shallow to you. Situations that seemed normal to everyone else often left you restless, like something was missing. You weren't imagining it, you were different. At times, this loneliness may have been painful. You may have wished you could just be like everyone else, that you could blend in, that you wouldn't always feel this quiet distance between yourself and the world. But what if this wasn't a burden? What if it was a form of protection? Some people get lost in the crowd. They attach themselves to anything and anyone, getting pulled into distractions, into relationships that drain them, into paths that weren't meant for them. That never happened to you. Even when you tried to follow the crowd, something always pulled you back. It wasn't that you weren't capable of fitting in, it was that you weren't meant to. This reminds me of Rumi, the great Persian poet and mystic. He often wrote about an unshakable loneliness, not from people, but from the world itself. Rumi didn't see this loneliness as a curse. He believed it was a sign of belonging to something greater. Instead of feeling lost in it, he leaned into it, using it as a gateway to deep spiritual wisdom. He understood something most people never do. Feeling set apart isn't a punishment. It's an invitation to seek something more. What if your loneliness has been doing the same for you? What if, instead of being proof that you don't belong, it was proof that you were meant to belong somewhere different? For years, maybe you struggled with friendships, relationships, and connections. Not because you didn't care, but because they never felt quite right. You may have formed bonds, but deep down, something always felt slightly off. There was an invisible wall, a feeling that you could not fully explain, but you knew it was there. That's because your spirit was guarding itself. Some people are meant to walk with you for life, but others, they're only temporary. They're distractions, they are detours. And even if you didn't realize it at the time, your soul did. That's why certain friendships didn't last. That's why you couldn't force connections that weren't aligned with you. Your loneliness wasn't just about not fitting in. It was about being protected from paths that weren't meant for you. There were probably times when you envied people who seemed at ease in the world, who didn't feel the same internal restlessness. You may have wished you could shut off that deeper awareness. Just go along with things, just feel normal. But no matter how much you tried, it never worked. You could play the part, but it never felt real. Because the truth is, you weren't designed to be like everyone else. You were meant to see what others miss. You were meant to question things most people accept without a second thought. You were meant to walk a different path. However, the difficult part is that this thing comes with a cost. Many who are called to something greater experience seasons of deep loneliness. It's not because they are unworthy of connection, but because they are being prepared. The quiet, the solitude, the more comfortably it creates space for reflection, for growth, for transformation. Without it, you might have lost yourself in the noise of the world. But now, after all these years, you've probably started to realize something. That feeling of being different, it wasn't in your head. You were set apart, and it wasn't to punish you, it was to prepare you. Have you always felt like you were somehow different from the people around you? Have you struggled to find deep, meaningful connections, even with those who cared about you? Have you ever felt a quiet sense of separation, even when you were surrounded by people? If so, you weren't just experiencing loneliness, you were experiencing a calling. Because those who are set apart often go through a season where they walk alone, not to break them, but to prepare them for something far bigger than they realize. Many who carry this sense of separation also share something else. They were given responsibilities far beyond their years. While others were allowed to be carefree, they were the ones people depended on, the ones who had to grow up fast, the ones who had to be strong when no one else could be. If you've ever wondered why you were forced to carry so much at such a young age, the next sign is going to make things very clear. Sign 7. You were given unusual responsibility at a young age. Some children had the luxury of being carefree. They could play, make mistakes, and know that someone else would always clean up the mess. That was never your reality. From an early age, you were the one people counted on. Whether it was your family, your friends, or even adults, responsibility always seemed to find you. While others were allowed to be young, you had to step up, sometimes long before you were ready. It wasn't always fair. It wasn't always easy. But it shaped you into someone different. Even when you didn't understand it at the time, life was preparing you for something greater. Think back to when you were younger. Were you the one who had to keep the peace in your family? The person who your siblings or even your parents leaned on for support? Maybe you found yourself solving problems that weren't yours or handling emotions that felt too heavy for your age. Even at school, teachers might have treated you differently. Friends confided in you when they needed guidance, even though you were still trying to figure things out yourself. People expected more from you, not because you asked for it, but because they sensed that you could handle it. While others had room to make mistakes, to be careless, to depend on others, you didn't have that option. For whatever reason, life demanded more from you. Many people want wisdom, leadership, and strength, but they don't realize that those things aren't simply given, they are earned. The strongest leaders aren't shaped by ease and comfort. They are built in the fire of responsibility. They are refined through the moments when they have no choice but to grow up fast. That's why life placed extra weight on your shoulders early on. Not because it was unfair, but because you were being trained to carry more than most. While others were learning through play, you were learning through experience. While they were figuring out who they were, you were already handling things that most people wouldn't face until adulthood. It may have felt overwhelming at times, but in reality, it was molding you into the person you needed to become. Throughout history, many great spiritual leaders have been called into responsibility at an early age. Dalai Lama is a prime example of this. At just 2 years old, he was identified as the reincarnation of the previous Lama. By the age of 4, he was taken from his home and placed in a monastery, expected to carry the spiritual and political weight of an entire nation. While other children played, he studied. While they explored freely, he trained in philosophy, leadership, and spiritual wisdom. His childhood was far from normal. It wasn't easy. He had to grow up fast, learn responsibility far beyond his years, and prepare for a role he didn't ask for. That early responsibility shaped him into the leader he was meant to become. Looking at your own life, can you see the same pattern? Were you entrusted with things that felt too big for you at the time, only to realize later that they made you stronger? It's natural to wonder why you had to carry so much while others were allowed to be carefree. Maybe you even resented it at times. However, have you ever noticed how that same responsibility made you different? The strength you developed at a young age has carried you through situations that break other people. While others struggle under pressure, you instinctively know how to stay calm and find solutions. While they panic, you step up. That's because you weren't just surviving those early years, you were being trained for something bigger. Being responsible from a young age can feel like a double-edged sword. People assume you can handle anything, so they rarely check to see if you're okay. They turn to you for advice, for leadership, for help. However, when you need someone, it often feels like no one is there. Maybe you've learned to carry things on your own because you had no other choice. Maybe you've been so used to being strong that you don't even know how to let others help you. Here's something important. Even strong people need rest. Even those called to lead need moments where they can lay down their burdens. You were never meant to carry everything alone. If you were the child who had to mature quickly, if people trusted you with their problems, even when you were still figuring out your own, if responsibility always seemed to find you, then this is more than just a personality trait. It's a mark of someone who was called. Not everyone is given this weight, but you were. Because your life isn't meant to be ordinary. You were being shaped for something greater. Being given responsibility at a young age is one thing. Those who are truly chosen often experience something even more mysterious, moments where, against all odds, something protects them. Times when the outcome should have been worse, but it wasn't. Situations that could have ended in disaster, yet somehow they didn't. Sign 8. You experienced supernatural protection. There are moments in life that leave you shaken, times when you realize that could have been the end. I shouldn't have made it through that. However, somehow you did. Maybe it was an accident you walked away from without a scratch. Maybe it was a dangerous situation where you felt something guiding you away just in time. Or maybe you survived something emotional or spiritual, an experience that should have broken you, but instead, you're still standing. Most people would call it luck, but deep down, you know better. You weren't just fortunate, you were protected. Think back on your life. Can you recall a moment when something should have gone wrong, but it didn't? Perhaps you missed a tragic event in mere minutes. Maybe you felt an unexplained urge to change your plans, only to realize later that it kept you from danger. Or there were times when you were at your lowest, convinced you wouldn't recover, yet somehow things turned around. Most people wouldn't have walked away, but you did. That's not an accident. That's divine intervention. Your life was never meant to be ordinary. That's why no matter how many times the storm surrounded you, it never consumed you. Some believe life is just a series of random events, that things happen with no deeper meaning. But for you, there have been too many close calls, too many unexplainable moments to believe this was all coincidence. When people look back at their lives, some see a series of lucky breaks, but those who are chosen, they recognize a pattern. You weren't just surviving, you were being preserved. Because when someone carries a calling, their path is guarded. It doesn't mean life is easy. It doesn't mean you haven't faced pain or loss. But it does mean that no matter how close the darkness came, it was never allowed to take you. History is filled with stories of people who were protected in ways that can't be explained by logic alone. One powerful example is the Prophet Muhammad. Early in his mission, when he was spreading the message of Islam, many wanted him dead. He faced assassination attempts, exile, and relentless opposition. Yet time and time again, he was miraculously spared. One of the most well-known moments of divine protection happened when he and his companion Abu Bakr were fleeing from Mecca. They hid in a cave as their enemies hunted them down, searching every possible hiding place. By all logic, they should have been found. But as the enemy approached the cave, something incredible happened. A spider quickly wove a web across the entrance, and a dove nested nearby. Seeing this, the pursuers assumed no one could be inside and left. That wasn't just nature. That was divine protection. His life was preserved, not just for his own sake, but because his mission wasn't finished yet. Looking at your own life, can you see the same pattern? Times when something greater was shielding you, not because of chance, but because your story wasn't meant to end there. It's natural to wonder, why me? Why was I protected when others weren't? That's a heavy thought. However, the truth is that protection always comes with a purpose. Your life isn't random. If you were pulled back from danger, if you were given another chance when others weren't, it's because your mission isn't complete. Whatever you were saved from, whatever should have taken you out but didn't, it was not just so you could continue existing. It is because you're meant to impact this world in ways you might not even realize yet. Those who carry a powerful purpose often face opposition, not just in the physical world, but in ways unseen. The fact that you have experienced so many close calls and so many moments of unexplainable protection means one thing: your presence here matters. If there was no purpose for your life, there would be no need for divine intervention. The enemy doesn't attack what isn't a threat. The fact that you've been through so much yet still remain standing, that's proof that you were never walking alone. Pause for a moment, reflect on your journey. Can you recall a time when something should have gone terribly wrong, but at the last second, it didn't? Have you ever felt like there was something unseen guiding you away from danger? Those weren't coincidences, they were signs. Your life has been protected because you still have something important to do. The question is, have you started stepping into that purpose? Experiencing supernatural protection is powerful. Truly chosen ones don't just live through unexplainable moments, they also see the world differently. They ask questions no one else thinks to ask. While others accept what they are told, they search for deeper truths. They see beyond the surface, drawn to knowledge and understanding in ways most people never consider. Sign 9. You always ask the question, no one could think. Most people go through life without ever questioning the world around them. They accept what they're told, follow traditions, and rarely stop to ask, is this really the truth? But you were never like that. Even as a child, your mind worked differently. While other kids were focused on playing, fitting in, and following the rules, you were thinking about things far beyond your years. Why are we here? What happens after we die? If God is real, why does He allow suffering? Maybe the adults around you didn't know how to answer. Some admired your curiosity, but others dismissed it, telling you to stop overthinking and to just accept things as they are. However, no matter how much people brushed off your questions, you couldn't turn off your search for truth. Because you weren't just a thinker, you were a seeker. Most people are satisfied with the explanations they're given. They believe what they're taught and don't feel the need to dig deeper. But for you, that was never enough. If something didn't make sense, you couldn't ignore it. You needed to explore, to analyze, and understand the bigger picture. When someone gave you an answer, you didn't just accept it, you tested it. This wasn't just intelligence, it wasn't just curiosity. It was a sign that you were meant to uncover wisdom that others overlook. Think back to your childhood. Did you ever ask something that made adults pause, something they struggled to explain? Did you challenge ideas that others blindly followed? Maybe you spent hours thinking about things your friends didn't care about. Maybe you found yourself lost in deep thoughts while others were talking about things that felt meaningless to you. At times, it may have made you feel out of place. That's because you were thinking on a different level than those around you. It wasn't that you wanted to be different, it's that your mind simply couldn't accept things without understanding them first. Many of the world's greatest spiritual minds were just like this, restless thinkers who refused to accept things at face value. One of the best examples is Swami Vivekananda. As a child, he was different. He wasn't satisfied with just learning religious texts. He wanted proof. He constantly questioned his teachers, challenging them to explain God in a way that made sense. His curiosity led him to Ramakrishna, a great spiritual teacher. And his first question was simple yet powerful: have you seen God? It wasn't enough for him to believe just because others did. He needed experience, understanding, and personal truth. That relentless search for knowledge turned him into one of the most influential spiritual leaders in the world. He didn't just repeat what he was taught, he uncovered wisdom through deep questioning, reflection, and experience. His story proves something important. The people who ask the deepest questions are the ones who discover the greatest truths. Being a deep thinker isn't always easy. Maybe people told you that you were too intense, that you should stop analyzing everything. Maybe they got frustrated when you wouldn't just accept what they told you. You weren't trying to be difficult. You weren't questioning for the sake of it. That's the difference between those who live on the surface and those who are called to something greater. Thinking this way often creates a sense of loneliness. You might have struggled to connect with people who didn't think as deeply as you did. While others talked about everyday things, your mind was elsewhere, exploring, questioning, searching for something more. Maybe you tried to fit in, to silence your thoughts, to go along with what everyone else seemed content with. But that never worked, did it? No matter how much you tried to ignore it, your mind always returned to the same questions, the same search for meaning. Because you weren't meant to just go through life. You were meant to seek something greater. Seeing beyond the surface comes with a price. It can make you feel disconnected from others. While they focus on daily routines, your thoughts drift toward the meaning behind it all. Maybe you've wondered why you couldn't just be like everyone else, why your mind couldn't just relax, why you always felt the need to keep searching. However, here's the truth. You weren't meant to be like everyone else. The way your mind works, the way you analyze, question, and seek deeper understanding, that's not a flaw, that's a calling. Take a moment and reflect. Have you always been drawn to life's biggest mysteries? Have you struggled with accepting things just because you were told to? Have you ever felt like your mind worked on a different level than those around you? If so, this isn't just curiosity. It's proof that you were created to explore truths that most people never even think to seek. Every great seeker in history started with one simple thought: there must be more. That's exactly what you've been feeling your entire life. Some people search for truth with their minds. However, those who are truly chosen don't just think about God, they feel Him. Even before they fully understand faith, even when they haven't been taught about Him, they sense something greater. A presence guiding them, watching over them, walking with them, even when they don't realize it. If you've ever felt a deep spiritual connection, even when you couldn't explain it, then the next sign is going to reveal something profound about your journey. Sign 10. You felt God's presence, even when you didn't know. There were moments in your life when you should have felt completely alone, but somehow you didn't. Maybe you were in the middle of heartbreak, sitting in a room by yourself, convinced no one in the world could possibly understand your pain. Yet, in that silence, there was something else. A warmth, a reassurance, a feeling that even if no one else saw you, you were still seen. Or perhaps you were in a situation that should have terrified you, but instead of fear, you felt an unexplainable calmness. Logically, you should have been panicking, but something greater surrounded you, steadying your heart and letting you know you were protected. Even as a child, maybe you had those moments where you'd look up at the sky and sense that life was bigger than what people around you were talking about. Maybe you felt something in nature, something in music, something in the quiet spaces of your mind that made you feel connected to something beyond yourself. You might not have had the words for it then, but you knew you were never truly alone. At the time, you might have questioned if it was just your imagination. Maybe you brushed it off as just a passing feeling. But looking back now, you can see the truth. God was there before you even knew how to look for Him. Some people first encounter God through church, scripture, or religious teachings. Their awareness of Him comes from what they were told and what they were taught. But for you, it was different. You didn't just hear about God, you felt Him. Even before you had the words to describe it, something inside of you just knew. It wasn't something anyone had to convince you of. It wasn't something you had to be taught. His presence was something you experienced long before you understood what faith even meant. Maybe it happened in a moment of sadness when you were certain that no one cared. Just as the weight of that thought becomes unbearable, a sudden wave of comfort comes over you. It didn't fix everything, but it gave you enough strength to keep going. Maybe there were times when life was spinning out of control, and just when you thought everything would fall apart, something shifted, just enough to remind you that you weren't completely abandoned. Even in your most difficult moments, even when you doubted, something was always pulling you back. Many great spiritual leaders have had moments where they felt God's presence long before they fully understood it. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, is one of them. As a young man, Wesley was deeply religious. He followed all the right traditions, studied theology, and tried to live a good life. But something was missing. Even though he knew about God, he didn't truly feel him. Doubt followed him everywhere. He wondered if he was just going through the motions, if maybe he had never truly encountered God at all. Then, one night, everything changed. He went to a small gathering where someone was reading from Martin Luther's writings. It wasn't a dramatic sermon. There was no grand miracle, just simple words being spoken in a quiet room. But as Wesley listened, something began to stir within him. He later wrote in his journal that his heart was strangely warmed. It was in that moment that he truly felt God, not as an idea, not as a doctrine, but as a living presence. It was subtle, yet powerful. A warmth he couldn't explain, a certainty that transformed him from the inside out. That moment changed everything. He went from knowing about God to experiencing Him. From that day forward, his life took on a new purpose, and he became one of the most influential spiritual leaders of all time. Think about your own life. Can you recall a moment when something similar happened? A moment when you weren't expecting it, when you weren't even looking for it, yet suddenly you felt something? A deep, quiet certainty that you weren't alone? That wasn't just a passing emotion. That was God confirming what has always been true. You have always been His. God doesn't always speak through grand miracles or dramatic revelations. Sometimes He speaks in whispers. In this way, a situation turns out better than expected. In this way, a feeling of peace comes over you just when you need it most. In the way a person enters your life at exactly the right time, saying the words you need to hear. Even in moments of doubt, even when you felt distant from God, He was never distant from you. Looking back, you might start to see the patterns, times when you felt lost, yet somehow you found your way. Times when you should have been afraid, yet something inside you remained calm. Times when you thought you had reached your breaking point, yet the strength to keep going appeared just when you needed it. That wasn't a coincidence. That was God's quiet way of saying, I am with you. If you've ever walked through something painful, yet felt an unexplainable strength carrying you through it, that was Him. If you've ever been in a moment of fear, yet felt strangely at peace, that was Him. If you've ever sensed that you were being watched over, guided, protected, even when you didn't understand why, that was Him. It's not always loud, it's not always obvious, but His presence has always been there, shaping your journey, holding you up when you didn't even know you needed it. Even before you believed in Him, He believed in you. Even before you sought Him, He was seeking you. Now that we've gone through these signs, take a moment to reflect. Look back on your life, the challenges, the questions, the moments when you felt different. None of it was random. You were chosen. Even in your hardest seasons, even when you doubted everything, God's presence was always with you. Every experience, every obstacle was shaping you for something greater. The question isn't, was I chosen? Because you were. The real question is, what will you do with what you now know? If this message spoke to you, don't ignore it. Subscribe for more, and join the community of seekers with us. Share this with a troubled soul, someone who needs to hear it. Also, tell me in the comments, which of these signs resonated with you the most? Let's start a conversation. You're here for a reason. Now, it's time to walk in it.